Okay, so we talked about the development of property in the discourse, the second discourse, and how people become, through it, sort of enslaved to a system. Whether they are rich or whether they are poor, they are not free anymore. The rich have their property to protect, and as we know, this is why laws are developed. And they become desirous of ever more. It inflames people's desires for everything. So they're enslaved to their desires as well as their property, and the poor are enslaved to the rich. And their behavior is warped by that system as well. And it's because the rich are threatened by the anger of the poor that they create a full-blown government. So, very different explanation for government than Locke. And this is leading up to the social contract. This is what he thinks is wrong and why we need a new social contract. On the top of 402, he says, bereft of valid reasons to justify himself and sufficient forces to defend himself, easily crushing a private individual, but himself crushed by troops of bandits, alone against all, and unable on all accounts of mutual jealousies to unite with his equals against enemies united by the common hope of plunder, the rich, pressed by necessity, finally conceived the most thought-out project that ever entered the human mind. It was to use in his favor the very strength of those who attacked him, to turn his adversaries into his defenders, to instill in them other maxims, to give them other institutions, which were as favorable to him as natural right was unfavorable to him. What does Rousseau mean there by using those who attacked him, that is, the rich using those who would attack them to protect them? What does he mean by that? Rousseau's, uses a lot of very effusive language, and he gets pretty emotional, and sometimes it's hard to understand exactly what he's saying. So can we get concrete here?
Is he talking about like the serfs who gladly overthrew their lords if they could?
Yeah, that would be one example. So how do the rich use these common people when they make this government, so that the serfs become not a threat but somebody that they use to protect themselves?
Institutional oppression?
Yeah, well, making the laws so that they can't arm themselves, right? And later on, actually, the creation of armies. At his time, the serfs were largely moving off the land, and the feudal system was coming to an end, and you had more and more common people in the cities trying to find a job, and the development of larger popular armies was beginning. So in a really concrete sense, then, these common people become the protectors of the rich. If they're not doing that through the army, maybe they're paying taxes, which then support the government that oppresses them, that keeps them in their place. So he sees this as a great irony that people wouldn't have willingly bought into. Okay, Hobbes and Locke both say people in the state of nature they came together and they all decided that, in the Hobbes case, survival, or in Locke's case is commodious living, and our rights are worth creating this government. And Rousseau is saying he probably has never seen a government that people would have willingly created. Yeah, because it oppresses most people by keeping the classes in place, supporting property rights, and it makes people feel, or it puts out propaganda that makes people feel as though it is their government, either through a social contract language or more generally, at that time through monarchy. The symbol of the people, representing the people, is the monarch and all that he represents. But this is just propaganda to fool people into obedience. Okay. So just to make it really clear, he says on the right-hand side of 402, such was or should have been the origin of society and laws. That's a kind of bad translation. Might have been would be better, because he's talking about what his explanation, not what of actual government, not what he wants here, which gave new fetters to the weak and new forces to the rich, irretrievably destroying natural liberty, established forever the law of property and inequality, changed adroit usurpation into an irrevocable right, and for the profit of a few ambitious men, henceforth subjected the entire human race to labor, servitude, and misery. It is readily apparent how the establishment of a single society rendered indispensable that of all the others, and how to stand head to head against the united forces it was necessary to unite in turn. So you have this massive power of the state that unites against what would otherwise rebel against it. It enforces class lines, property rights, and now we have people, these previously serfs, some still serfs, others, laborers, others wage earners, okay? But they're all working long hours, which in itself for Rousseau is a form of slavery, because in nature they only had to work enough to subsist, okay? Maybe that's 3 hours a day. And now they're working 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day.
So he's saying hard working is equated to slavery?
It is in this system, yes, because they're doing it not because they absolutely would want to if they knew, if they knew and had the option not to.
Now, what would he say about today, do you think? Like working hard today, like somebody who has to work a 10-hour shift, would he say that that is still too much?
He would say that.
Even though our societal rules there's obviously no form of slavery now or anything like that.
No, it's not actual outright slavery, but it's a type of enslavement, because you're working largely for the benefit of another.
Okay.
And you're working far longer, and this is your life basically that is being taken away from you and given to another. Whereas in nature, you would not have to do hardly any of this. You could just pick up the fruits of the earth, eat, drink, and lay around, maybe enjoy life, okay?
Only things were that easy.
Yeah, I know.
Well, would he make a difference? Because when you say hardworking, right, I think of, this hardworking American kind of slogan that a lot of politicians use,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess to me has a different connotation than someone who really doesn't want to be at the factory pressing.
Yeah, because to
Mm-hmm.
that it seems like the hardworking American tries to get up in society, make
Mm-hmm.
themselves better. Would he still see that person as being enslaved?
Really, he would. That person is still
Man.
enslaved to the system, to the people who employ him. He may not know that. He may think that because he's been more or less propagandized, that that he's working for his own betterment. But even if he gets ahead, even if, like most of us do, we end up getting a little bit ahead at some point, we start getting the things we want, those things that we get are further enslavement in Rousseau's mind, because we don't really need them, and now we have to maintain them, and now they divide us from other people. The more prosperous we become, the less we connect with other people, and we see our interest as different from theirs, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, he doesn't buy into the whole idea that Locke does of a rising tide lifts all boats, and it's good to be industrious, and it's good to, get out of the subsistence level and into a higher level of living.
So how would he see then, because obviously now we live a lot longer than people did back then and in the state of nature. So how would he see people who have retired but decide to go back to work because they're just bored?
Oh God, that's a great question. I don't want to speak for Rousseau, but I do think that the boredom comes from, I believe he's actually addressed this, so I'm on pretty firm ground, that boredom comes from overexcitation. In other words, the reason why they're bored is because their life has been full of stuff for so many years, and they're used to it, but really if you look at what they have spent most of their time on, they've frittered it away on things that don't really matter. Does what they do at work really matter? Okay. For a lot of people, no. For a few people, yes. And I think those would be a little harder for him to deal with. But a lot of the capitalist economy could be seen as not really necessary or meaningful. Okay? And I think that he would probably see it this way. So boredom is a civilized disease that wouldn't happen to people in the natural state. The Native American in the tribal setting who gets to sit around a fire for several hours every night isn't bored. He's got, the fire to look at. He's got the people around him to dance with and talk to and so forth. And people can make those kinds of things interesting. I don't know if he wants us to go all the way back to the pre-conscious state. I don't think so. But he kind of romanticizes that early, the early family and clan setting. And frankly, really, it is true that, if you take away all of the complexities and you get into an environment that's simpler, you do end up being able to entertain yourself. It just takes a while. I don't know if any of you have ever gone on extended camping, hiking, backpacking. Okay, so after a while, it gets interesting, but at first it's almost painful, right? Because you're like, where's my whatever TV show, internet, and cell phone and everything, and then after a while you start looking around and interacting with people. So, but I think the question that you also asked about reliving longer, this would be a little bit more difficult. Maybe Rousseau would say, it's not the duration of life that matters, but the quality of life. But I think that, you've got a good point, and one that he might not have anticipated, that all of this development leads to a lot greater health and leads to a lot of other good things as well. Okay, but he's generally cynical.
He's trying to make the point, though, that this government, the way it is now, cannot lead to that quality of health, correct?
He doesn't think so. I don't think that Rousseau foresaw that happening. He saw people continuing to be oppressed, people continuing to be poor. So you have to do a little speculating as to what Rousseau would say about, say, the rise of a very large middle class and all of that. Okay.
He did talk about how all these the new food, the luxuries are just, there's, I don't think he mentioned extending your life, but they're making you sick.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like, you're eating these really fancy foods, but what's doing for your stomach, or
Yeah.
Which is, you see that all the time in our society. We do know what is healthy, but a lot of people don't follow it. And back then, of course, people didn't know, and they'd have health problems they couldn't even explain or do very much about. But a lot of times when people have something good, they usually have too much of it. It's difficult. However, on the other hand, it provides the opportunity for people to actually govern their lives if they want to, and to be healthy if they want to. So, on top of everything, though, Rousseau didn't like any system where people are unequal, as we'll see even more in the social contract. So even though we have a large middle class, we have large inequalities that come along with it. He doesn't like that. So the fact that they're still poor, or that there's a large range in the middle class, and especially that there's these wealthy people up here, that he wouldn't like, because we do these comparisons and that separates us. And I think he would still say we spend a lot of time on things that really aren't important. His critique resonates a little bit with Marx's, but not entirely, because he's not a materialist. Right? So as we move through this, we'll be able to see similarities and differences. But this is something that a lot of socialists say. People in these economies with private property spend an awful lot of time doing work that doesn't really benefit them. Yeah. Either it benefits somebody else, or they're obtaining something that they don't really need.
I see where these communist notions come in now, where one could believe that.
Yeah.
Like we talked about last time, I can see it.
We don't even have that in the socialist countries like Finland and Sweden. They don't go to school until 7 years old, because they're like, well, you should be at home.
Oh, Finland's education system is awesome.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that documentary before on their education system?
No.
If you're interested in that type of thing, watch it. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
I watched it when I was in high school. I was blown away.
Wow.
They have the number one, or they did, couple of years ago. I'm not sure if they still are, but
Mhm. All the way through college? Is it?
Up to the university. Oh, yeah. So like it's up. They go to high school until they're like 19, and then they have conscription or civil service.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then afterwards, they have like pretty much every level of university. They have like, amazing technical, polytechnical, like actual universities.
Mm-hmm.
They
Interesting.
do a very good job there of taking out the whole testing for achievement idea. They do
Mm.
more just learn what you want to know.
Yeah.
And it works out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody performs very well.
The testing thing is something that we excel in, of course, and
Yeah.
it reflects our highly competitive,
Yeah.
and
It does.
we need to measure, and it does discourage people, and it makes people think of the test score rather than what they're learning. That's the biggest
I'm
problem
pretty sure
with
that their most of their grades was more based on, if I remember correctly, it was like discussion and participation
Mm-hmm.
and like contributing to conversation,
That's neat.
showing that you did your assignment that way. And they'd only take like one test. That'd be about it.
We need to move to Finland.
Yeah.
They've got it right.
I studied there and it was so weird because we kept like asking like, wait, how are you going to, like we wanted to know like the American students, every single, like how are you going to grade us? Like are there going to be tests, all this? And they're like, no, just don't worry. Just do the reading, come to class, we'll talk about it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's not, like kind of, it was like neurosis almost, like we were like, no, like a little neurotic about it, like having
Yeah, because you're not used to that.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a more Rousseauian system, although I'm not sure how much of the higher education he would value, but people being free, feeling as though they're there voluntarily, that's a huge deal, rather than having the whip being cracked, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, or else, the more people feel as though they're doing what they want to do, the freer they are. So, and I assume Finland's a socialist country, right? So they've
Yes.
got, it's a democratic socialist country, so the government regulates the property, and that also goes along.
Isn't education all free there for
Yeah.
even college too, correct? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We select pay, which is a little.
Instead, we want to totally privatize higher education, I'm pretty sure. The last thing I heard was that about 80%, they voted that 80% of Pell Grants will now go to private institutions and 20% to public institutions. It's
Are
like
you serious?
they want to kill public education. Yeah, that just,
They're going to force every single school to go private.
I
Eventually.
think we should do it at K-State. That's a radical idea, but
It is,
why, if you're getting funded mainly from private sources and tuition, why should you also have to do everything the state legislature says?
And then you get the state out of your pie.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway,
That's not a bad idea.
I don't feel very free at the moment. Okay.
I'm a little mixed on that one because I get most of the only reason I'm here in school is because the state's paying for it. I couldn't afford to come here if it was a private
See,
institution.
and that, we don't want to do less of that. We want to do more of that so that people can go to college whether they can afford it or not. That's certainly the way it was when I went to school, or I wouldn't have been. I got a scholarship all the way through my undergrad that was based partly on need. And, I couldn't have done it otherwise. All right, I'm going to skip over the part on war because we're going to come back to that in the social contract, but I do want to end the commentary on the discourse with what he says about revolution, because it's a little counterintuitive here, and it's important to understand what he means. So let's take a look at what he says on 406 over on the right. Now remember, Locke establishes the right to revolution, and it's based upon people's right to not be tyrannized over, to the right to self-preservation, to freedom of movement, and other liberties, which he says they won't want to give up in order to have government. They prefer nature. So if a government becomes tyrannical, they have a right to revolt. Well, you would think, as radical as Rousseau is sounding here, that he would be all for revolution, and especially since the French revolutionaries liked Rousseau and tended to use his thought as one of the bases for revolution. But actually, Rousseau he contradicts the expectation here. He's not contradicting himself, because we'll see in the social contract, he does not want the type of government that the revolutionaries wanted. But on the right-hand side of the page, let's just see what he says here. About middle of that page, he says, but the horrible dissensions, the infinite disorders that this dangerous power would necessarily bring in its wake demonstrate more than anything else how much need human governments had for a basis more solid than reason alone. That was the whole basis of the French Revolution, according to the philosophes, was reason alone. How necessary it was for public tranquility that the divine will intervene to give sovereign authority a sacred and inviolable character, which took from the subjects the fatal right to dispose of it. If religion had brought about this good for men, it would be enough to oblige them to cherish and adopt it, even with its abuses, since it spares even more blood than fanaticism causes to shed. But let us follow the thread of our hypothesis. This is, if it had been written after the French Revolution, would have been an indictment of the French Revolution. It was written before, okay? But, you know, he's saying there was a lot of good in this idea of divine right, because it created stability. If this was the one thing that religion did, even though it has caused abuses in other ways, this would be enough, because through the stability of government, you avoid fanaticism. And fanaticism brings about more bloodshed than this old system. So I would just raise that and indicate that, you know, as we're going into the social contract, he's not looking for a government of perfect, what rational, self-interested individuals would call freedom. The type of freedom that Rousseau wants is something very different. And it's not intuitive to people who are raised in our country to be able to understand that freedom. It's closer to the Finnish freedom, which a lot of Americans would say is not freedom at all, because, you know, they don't ultimately own their property. I'm sure in the educational system, the government controls the choices. And so a lot of Americans would say, well, I'd rather risk being poor, or I'd rather risk having these inequalities than to have that, because it's not freedom. But for Rousseau, freedom is the feeling that you are free, that you are in accord with what's going on, what your government does. When you are disagreeing, you're oppressed. It's all about your feelings, okay? Because really that is all that we have to experience, okay? It's not about reason, which tries to supersede feelings and tries to talk you into thinking that something that's going to hurt you is actually in your self-interest, okay? So feeling is a better barometer for Rousseau, and he wants a government in which people feel free. Like everything that the government does is their will, okay? That might require a great deal of socialization, a term that we previously introduced, in which Rousseau usually thinks of as negative, because it's usually done in a way to oppress people, to keep them in line, to keep them thinking about what it is they should do. But the right type of socialization can lead people to this freedom that comes from consensus, okay? Consensus is everyone agreeing. And so in the social contract, we will have a discussion of civil religion, of censorship, and other mechanisms for keeping people in accord with each other, okay?
My issue with this is he talks so he basically says revolution will mess and destroy tranquil society.
Mm-hmm.
But he would rather people live in this system than revolt.
Apparently so. Revolution causes
Because
even more.
He just confuses me so much, because he goes tries to make it so clear that the system is terrible. You know, the state of nature is so much better than the system, but we cannot revolt to the system.
It just makes it worse. This is a very conservative thought. You know, I mean, he, in a way, Burke says the same thing. There are many things that are wrong with government, and we should try to reform them over time. But if we throw caution to the wind and revolt, people die in large numbers, the economy is set back, lots of terrible things happen. You could end up being worse than before. It's like throwing the dice and hoping for the best.
This seems like a very Hobbes thing to say.
It does.
For, like you said, everything that he said up to this point would make you think that he is not going to say something quite like this. And
Like
then he just
this,
goes and throws 180 and is just like, but, you know, our system, they have necessary lies, they may, you know, abuse their power and everything, but since it is for the betterment of everybody, you need to obey them.
Well, it's not quite, I mean, that's close to his reasoning, but he's saying revolution is even worse. So he's not saying that we should just accept all the things that government do, which he has built up to basically condemning it all, right? And saying that people are oppressed. So he's not saying we should just simply accept that, but he is saying the way to fix it is not through revolution.
So I would say like two things to add like to that is like one, like you wouldn't, like ideally this can only work in a really small group of people, which if you look at Finland, that's why it only works like there. And in Sweden, like it just, things that work there could never work over here. So what he's describing, like consensus, like this special type of socialization, your government probably would, you know, it maybe in his like ideal government, they would be led by the peace and love of people who like want equality, when they do, like they would only oppress you when they have to, you know.
It does matter, you're right, for consensus. The smaller the group, the more likely it is, because you have a cohesive, you know, culture, people agree on basics and so forth. And that he definitely is going to want. You know, he wants to create that if it doesn't exist already, and he has mechanisms for doing that. So he's not going to advocate any type of diversity, okay? Not of ideas or religion, you know. He doesn't deal much with race, but he might have a problem with that as well, simply because if it creates any sort of cultural divisions, you've got a problem, because you have to have a homogenous culture to get this done. So you're right, it's much less likely that we could ever have anything like this here.
I feel like
it's just a big country.
There was that kind of a system, like where each group just stuck to themselves, you would really start getting into the Hitlerish ideas of one race is going to be greater than the others, and just like absolutely no diversity between the groups. It's like if you've never experienced diversity in your own group, when you encounter it when you're out and about and you run into it, chances are you're not going to like it very much, and you're probably going to want to destroy it. So I feel like that would just cause a lot more conflict.
That have like with like nation states, like, you know, before the like mass movement, states were in their own little, you know, little bubbles, and like Finns are horribly racist because there's so little diversity, and like, or like Australians are also kind of racist, you know, like they're stereotypically.
If you had so many little pockets, though, because I mean, with a big country, it's harder to, I guess, mobilize and to like attack another group than it would be for a smaller country. And if you just had all these small countries, I feel like that would get out of hand really, really fast.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And as Europe kind of proved. So some people see a whiff of fascism in Rousseau. It's isn't it funny that this supposedly free-loving revolutionary figure could be seen in that way?
He's a fascist.
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit.
I mean, I can.
You see it more in the social contract than you do here.
But I mean, I just keep thinking how much Locke and Rousseau would hate each other.
Yes, they would.
I don't think that they could sit in the same room together. I really don't.
They would be enemies for sure, and probably, even though this may go along a little bit with Hobbes, he probably isn't going to like Hobbes either.
Yeah.
But Locke in particular, because he justifies income inequality, would be on Rousseau's list.
Yeah. Well, it just seems like Hobbes wouldn't like anybody anyways. He's kind of been like in
just
the
not a
corner
nice
himself.
man.
Yeah.
You say that, and all I can picture is this grumpy old man just sitting in the corner with his face all scrunched up.
He did look
angrily
kind of
writing
like that,
stuff.
especially as he got older. He lived into his late 80s, and he had, it was really old for the times. He never married, and he played tennis every day. Maybe that's the key to success, I don't know, but then he was like so unhappy, and he had that look on his face. There's a painting of him.
Just always grumpy.
Yeah, he looks like it in the painting anyway. Maybe the reason why he never married is because nobody wanted to be with him. But I think that he would probably say so that he could spend all of his time on more important matters.
Before we head into this quick question, what would Rousseau say would be a good quality of life? Because I feel like when we were talking about that a little bit earlier, you know, how he's wanting people to have a good quality of life, that's very dependent on the person you're talking to.
It is now, because we have created all of these different lifestyles and, you know, choices, but in a simpler setting, you know, there wouldn't be those choices, and it wouldn't be that individualized. It would be very simple things like, you know, having a nice roof over your head and enough food to eat, and people around you.
True love be one of them.
Yeah, I think so. The simpler type of love, the simpler type of family, those things would be signs of a high quality of life. Robust health. He blames ill health, as Becca pointed out, on the luxuries and the stuff that comes along with civilization. So the more simple you live your life and the more physical exercise you get and so forth, the probably the healthier you're going to be. The simpler you eat, definitely the healthier you're going to be, and so the longer you would end up living.
So he does think we can go back to the point where we live as like that simple of a life, but he doesn't think we can go farther back than that.
Right. He doesn't think you can go all the way back. We have changed. We have unalterably changed because we're now social creatures. But we can go back to a simpler way of life, and he tries to do this in the social contract. And one of the first things he does is he takes away pure private property rights, and the government becomes like in the Finnish system, you know, it's the ultimate arbiter of property. And he makes sure that no one can have more property than that which he can subsist upon. So that's going to put people back in this rustic state, you know, kind of like the settlers of the United States, where they were just kind of subsisting, a little bit of farming, a little bit of hunting, you know. To him, that's the healthy life. Even Plato, it reminds me of what he said in the Republic, between the so-called city of pigs and the luxurious city. Even Socrates said, well, people would be happier and healthier in this primitive state, but they can't stay in it, in his view, you know, because they want more than that. But if you look at the way people live, he says that's where you can find justice, just in how people interact with each other. It's very simple, you know. Do they love each other? Do they care for each other? When they trade, is it an even trade? Because there'd be, in this type of system, there would be giving and taking in that way. And if there's those good things, then that's what justice is, very simple. But in his view, people don't want that. And of course, there's great benefits for, in Socrates' view, for higher civilization as well. So he's not anti-civilization. But even he notices that, you know, the average person might be said to be happier in that state.
Yeah.
You know? And we have movements today that are, you know, people who decide they're going to go live in a micro house or on a small farm, and they're going to try to eke out a living doing that. People do that. And
like paleo diets, or like, you know, the plain white ceramics people are making, and, you know, it's kind of like integrating into all walks, like eating simpler, cleaner food and stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a trend right now, and some people take it to the extreme. One lady wrote a book. It's very popular. I can't remember her name, about getting rid of everything in your house. And you should evaluate every single thing, and if it doesn't bring you joy, okay. So she's not saying just utility, but if it doesn't bring you joy, you should throw it away, get rid of it. and you'll be happier as a result. And people swear by this, Or like I said, micro homes. People living in homes smaller than this room, like half the size of this room, and they'll build a loft in where they sleep, and there's a little place where they cook, and it's like living in a small trailer, and they'll stick that. A lot of the times it's on wheels so that they can move around, but they'll stick it in a nice setting, and they don't have any bills, so they say, I'm happier. I have next to no payments. I don't have to work, or I don't have to work as much. I mean, usually they do work, but they don't work as much. Maybe work part-time, make a little bit of money. Now, I don't know what happens to those people when they get sick or they get old. But then, somebody who's an advocate of this approach would say that's our problem, that we've gotten so far away from the natural state of living that when somebody gets sick and old, if there's no social safety net for them or insurance plan, then they're just doomed because we've forgotten how people can help each other. I've got a relative on my brother's wife. One of her brothers is a follower of Reverend Moon. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but it's a cult. And I think they come out of Japan. And one of the things they marry people in large, so he got married in this large mass marriage where the church put the two of them together without their consent. They just said, okay, you two marry. And they got married, and they've stayed married for, I think, about 20 years. And they live on this little farm where they make, they make everything for themselves, and then they contribute some. I think they're in Japan now, so they're doing that there. But they contribute some of it back to the larger group, and support the church somehow. But mainly they're just living the very, very, very simple life. And they've stuck with it, and I guess the family has kind of come to accept this. Well,
like doing the same thing, like, hey,
there's the boring thing again. I guess in their view, no, because they've got children to take care of and the extended family, and they get together.
Yeah, I don't know, like they're just like YouTube.
That's what they did.
Is scary. Like I saw a documentary on TV, like flipping through, and it was on the History Channel or something. It's like the dude of that church is like the Kim Jong-il.
Some young moon.
He's the Kim Jong-il of a cult, basically. It's terrible.
He's exploiting people.
Oh my gosh, he's terrifying.
I don't know how he does it, but he gets hundreds, if not thousands, of people to line up for these mass marriages. And from Rousseau's point of view, I'm not so sure putting two people together without their consent would be that much of an odd idea, since the romantic love angle is false and creates problems for him. So you just put two people together and say, okay, you're married, have a family, cooperate. You don't have to have these feelings, I don't know.
That kind of cuts out love altogether, though, because then you're not loving, you're just cooperating. There's a difference between actually loving somebody and just cooperating with them. Like
maybe they sort of come to love them from being around each other.
I mean,
why would so many people do this?
Well, yeah, I know. What would they do if they pair you with somebody and you clearly do not like that
Incompatible.
person? Yeah. Do you just say no and walk away? What do you do?
That comes to mind of that is
no, you walk away. As far as
comes to mind of that is the Mormon churches in Utah that the polygamists, the girls aren't allowed to choose who they marry. They are, they have to ask, and they will pair them up with a significantly older man. Mm-hmm. And if they don't like it, they're kind of stuck.
They have to leave. Well, they could leave, but they'd have to leave everything, all their family and support, and there's nothing for them, so it's very frightening to leave. I mean, just like with this situation, once a person gets into that cult and becomes more or less dependent on it, it becomes frightening to leave and to say, no, I don't want to do that.
Does the Mormon church still do that?
No, it's illegal.
But there's
I know it's illegal in the U.S., but do they do it in?
I don't know. I think the Mormons are only in the United States.
They are? Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know if they were or not.
They might have projected themselves into some other country, but it comes from Utah.
Yeah.
And there's been some illegal cults as a part of the Mormon church that, Mormons by and large have gotten way past that, but there are some people, like, I forget who that was, but that guy started up
there's one.
a subset of it, and
I think there's currently, I know there's at least one, there may be more than that, but they're all over around the Utah, Midwest area.
BYU, that's where they all go. Yeah.
And they live on compounds, and they've got their prophets that tell them everything that they have to do, and if they don't do it, they're basically out.
And you've got to ask yourself, what is it that makes people want to be in cults like that, and is there something that we're missing? You know, because a lot of people are attracted to them because they somehow give them meaning that isn't given to them by their current lives.
It's kind of like the same way people get into gangs. A lot of it, I feel like, has to do with the camaraderie that they feel initially. And so, you know, they won't see any of the negative sides of it. They'll just see this person is paying attention to me. They understand me. They know where I'm coming from. They'll, respect my decisions. And then you get into it, and it's like, oh, that's not quite how that works here.
To me, it seems more of like kind of this issue of socialization with Rousseau in a way that, from a young age, they're brought up, believing that this is what is right, this is what I believe, this is the way to follow.
That's how they could be perpetuated.
There's no better option, pretty much.
Yeah, if you're born into that type of situation, you're very likely to buy all of that. But people join these things too, voluntarily as adults.
Now that is the really tricky question.
Joining ISIS would be the most extreme example of this. People voluntarily going from civilized, fairly nice countries like Turkey, women even, and voluntarily joining ISIS.
I saw this guy driving in Manhattan that it was one of those license plate tags, that goes around your license plate, and it said ISIS on there.
Oh.
Yeah, he looked like a middle.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Did you call Homeland?
Well, I don't know if I didn't, because I didn't know if it had another meaning. I don't know.
It is an Egyptian goddess.
It is, yeah.
It is.
And it had a symbol that didn't it looked Middle Eastern, but it didn't, I don't know. I just don't know.
I'm surprised that the state of Kansas would issue, it wasn't right on the license plate.
No, it would have been like a plastic tag cover thing.
I'd say if you see it again, snap a picture of it.
I'm going to. Well, I was driving, so I didn't have the ability to,
Yeah, right. Not without killing yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Well, we're changing.
If the cop pulled you, it would have been like, yo, dude, the dude.
Yeah,
the dude.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But,
That's such a weird way to advertise,
it is.
Or carrying member of ISIS.
It is, but some young people will just they go completely off the deep end. Which again, it makes you wonder, what is it that people need that's not being fulfilled, that some of them need so badly that they'd be willing to do that, to identify with a group like ISIS or join ISIS or join,
Especially
a
when
cult.
it's risking your life. Like, you could go to jail for treason, practically.
Get blown up.
Yeah.
I mean, a large part of that I feel like stems from how they're raised initially.
Yeah.
Like, I guess they've done studies here in the U.S., and this is kind of more of a gang type thing, but kids that are, either abused or neglected when they're, between the ages of birth and 5, basically. If they're not getting enough attention from their parents, a lot of times they'll look for outside sources to identify with, and that's when they get the really bad.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of them are raised through, because there's so many different forms of Islam, and some of them are really radical, that when you're raised on that form of radicalized Islam, that it can brainwash you.
Well, sure, yeah. If they learn at an early age to hate other people, and to see Islam in that way, they don't stand much of a chance. And they do that.
Even though those ways of
kids.
Islam aren't even close to being right.
Right,
at all.
but they're not cracking the book, and especially as children, so they get all this built in before they get a chance to think for themselves. And that's how cults are perpetuated. The reason I dwell on that is because I think that Rousseau understands that the liberal system doesn't give people a great feeling of belonging and meaning. And this is one of the great flaws that it has, and it needs to be built in somehow. If it's not, then you will have people, if not doing those extreme things, a lot of people being more or less aimless and not feeling like they have a purpose, maybe involving themselves in lesser but still bad behavior. In a way, it's almost like the liberal freedom is negative freedom, right? It's freedom from, not freedom to. And so we have all of these choices, and when you have all of these choices, it's very easy to choose badly, especially when you're young and don't have a lot of experience to kind of guide you. So Rousseau's system is one of the things that it's trying to fix is this aimlessness and this sense of it's just me out here wandering around, try to figure out life, and bring people back to more of a state where they identify with each other. One of the attractions of gangs, like you said, is sort of loyalty, like family loyalty, which a lot of actual families don't experience now, right? So this promise of, I have your back, we'll be there for you no matter what. That's the kind of thing that they're told. You do this and you get initiated, and then we're your new family, and if you have any problem, we're going to all be there for you. That's highly seductive for people, because we do oftentimes, especially if we're come from an unstable family background, we do sort of feel like we're just kind of out there on our own. Maybe the government might be able to pick us up at some point, but our fellow human beings, we're sort of alienated from, okay? And he really does get that quite well about the liberal system. His solution may not be one that you're comfortable with. That's oftentimes the problem with philosophers. They're better at critiquing than they are at coming up with a viable solution.
Yeah.
But that's his critique, and it's really quite, it's quite profound, and why we shouldn't dismiss Rousseau. He's one of those philosophers that gives us perspective on the flaws of our own system.
It's him, Locke, and Hobbes. Both of their critiques are very prevalent, even some of them somewhat related to today's society, too.
Yeah, right. They give you a window in. We tend to, no matter what system we're born into, we tend to be uncritical of it. And I think it's got to be the best, and probably especially here, because frankly, in a lot of ways, in measurable ways, it is. Materialistically, we're definitely better off. Most people are probably happier than they are in a lot of other countries. Maybe not Finland, but a lot of other
They actually
countries.
have the highest suicide rate in the world.
Finland does?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
How does that?
Wow.
How does that
Highest
play?
levels of alcoholism.
How
Maybe
does
not
that
enough to
play?
do.
You
Maybe they're
know?
not working hard enough.
Yeah. Well, part of it, interestingly, is lack of sunlight.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Well, it's
yeah,
kind
I
of
guess
same
that's
here in
true.
the
They're
U.S.
very
Oregon and
north.
Washington are the highest suicide rated.
North
States.
Dakota, I bet too. You don't see the sun there for probably 6 months.
Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting that people
Yeah.
people have
I didn't
lived
think
in
about that.
Finland in that area, the Vikings, right? Long time ago, but they still haven't adapted to the light difference there. We all came from Africa at some point, but how long does it take for people to evolve to, the point where these differences don't affect them like that? It must
Well,
be
I
a
feel
long time.
That kind of thing is going to be a key biological aspect of the human body, because melatonin is basically where you get, that's where you get energy, that's where you get basically everything, like our biological processes, like being able to see,
Right.
like you get that from the sun, and if it's not there a lot,
Well, on the flip side, the sun is there literally all the time. The
But it's kind
it
of
does not set, which is a thing to get used to. But maybe if they didn't have other coping mechanisms like alcohol.
yeah, to get to sleep and just to relax. And, yeah, interesting.
Because I'm assuming that their stress levels would be so high, at least while they're growing up. Yeah, so that's why I just didn't. But that's interesting.
It
Plus
is.
sunlight.
Wow. Well, I know that's important, but I would have figured. Well, and the Finnish ought to be able to figure this out. If it's a light problem, then all the Finns should have these lamps that I've got in my bedroom that turn on. And
Yeah.
it's like the sunlight, and you stare at it for a while, and then you get your
Yeah.
good vitamin D and everything.